You're welcome back to your most authoritative news analysis platform. I'm your host, Samson Ladi Anyenni. So I decide once again to shelve my take, give the 5 minutes to my guest so we can make good use of it. But on this occasion, I want to proudly associate myself with one of our regular guests. He hasn't been on the show for a long while. I'm talking about Yaw Opong. Yaw Opong has written and authored this very fat book, Contemporary Trends in the Law of Immovable Property in Ghana. And I'm referring to it on the occasion of the Habitat Fair, Joy News Habitat Fair, which is going on presently. So I will recommend, like Justice Jones Doche has recommended this book to everybody, not only lawyers, but everybody. Particularly if you want to purchase properties and you have, because property purchase is a very big deal, you must do it and do it right. So this is Yaw D. Opong on Contemporary Trends in the Law of Immovable Property in Ghana. I recommend it to you. Thank you, Yaw. All right, so let me introduce my guest and we get to deal with the issues tabled for discussion this morning. And my guests are Abu Jinapor. He's a lawyer. He's Deputy Chief of Staff. Thanks for joining us, sir. Also here in the studio is Professor Ransford Jampo, Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Center for European Studies at the University of Ghana. Good morning and welcome, Doc. Good morning. Right. And when Newsfile did the flyers out and put a picture of you out, it was a picture with you with the Ghana flag, you know, around your neck. And it has generated some conversation, and some say,
I'll tell them I care about Ghana.
Some say it doesn't really look like just caring about Ghana, but it looks like a rebel. Okay, now Dr. Eric Odro Osai is a governance expert and a lawyer. Thanks for joining us, Doc.
My pleasure.
James Agalga is MP and ranking member, Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament. He's also a lawyer. Thank you for coming. We haven't had you here for a while.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So once again, you may say law file, except Prof. He will deal with his own law. He started discussing with me. You will get to hear that it doesn't take reading the law to do some of the things of the law. Right. So our first issue, we're looking at the Emil Short Commission's report and the white paper that has been issued, raising a lot of issues. So I want to hope and believe that everyone here has read that report so that we can stay within the report and dissect it as much as we can. Right, so listen to this brief.
Multiple gunshots heard at the scene of an otherwise peaceful election. An MP was assaulted in the process. Masked gun-wielding men, believed to be part of the National Security Secretariat's SWAT team, were accused of brutalizing innocent civilians. Government set up a commission to probe the matter, but contradictions and varied accounts would emerge.
Later, they also said they heard gunshots coming from within the compound of the house. Our boys then gave some 6 warning shots.
There were many, my lord.
Many?
If I'm not mistaken, they were holding them. If I'm not mistaken, it will be over 20 per what I saw.
Okay. And were you able to find out the source of these empty shells, who had, you know, fired these gunshots? The empty shells that you saw, were you able to detect?
I inquired, but the information they gave me was that they were fired by the task force team that came there.
I saw them point directly into the crowd, in the direction of the crowd, and fire.
So they fired a warning shot. This made them to retreat and started to run helter-skelter.
For the angle, I don't know for warning shot, but mostly once it's targeted at this one, for warning shot I think mostly it should be up. So once it's targeted at an object below the height of maybe a normal human being, then I don't see it as a warning shot.
And therefore you conclude that they were potentially aimed?
They were
not aimed at a tree, but aimed.
I may say so.
The commission concluded its work and submitted its report to the president on March 14. Article 283 of Ghana's constitution requires the president to cause a publication of the commission's report together with a white paper within 6 months. If the president decides not to do so, he must give reasons. For now, the scars of the violence still remain.
Somebody is over there now enjoying. He just shoot me. He wanted to shoot my life. I have a family, wife and children. Now business, anything is not going on. How should I go to look my family now? Once this committee is for justice, please, I want justice must be.
The Commission recommends that the structure of reporting within the national security setup needs to be revised. In the current scheme of things, the technical person who also occupies the statutory security position, being the National Security Coordinator, is consigned to a 4th level position in the reporting strata. It is recommended that he is elevated. The Commission recommends that the police should review their recruitment procedures and install merits-based criteria to ensure that the most qualified and not the most well-connected persons are enlisted. The Commission also urged the Electoral Commission to explore the possibility of resorting to electronic voting or some other method which does not depend on physical ballot boxes. Also, the Commission recommended the criminal prosecution of Mr. Ernest Akomia, alias Double, for the unauthorized possession of firearms. The Commission also recommended the criminal prosecution for the offence of assault, to wit, the slapping of Mr. Samuel George by Mohammed Suleimana. DSP Samuel Kojo Azugu's immediate removal from command responsibility at the Ministry of National Security, given his failure to appropriately command and control the SWAT team, was also recommended. For the Minister in charge of National Security, Mr. Brian Champong, the Emil Short Commission recommended that he is reprimanded for his ultimate responsibility as Minister in authorizing an operation of that character, and on a day of an election, the Executive Secretary of the Emil Short Commission, Ernest Kofi Abuchi, is satisfied with work done. On the other hand, the MP for Ningo Prampram, Sam George, is skeptical about the full implementation of the recommendations of the Emil Short Commission.
Right. So we took you memory lane and also brought you the report. And among other things, the Commission finds that the intelligence which formed the basis for the deployment of the armed men from national security was at best of unreliable quality, and this is the crux of the matter. The Commission finds that on the said day and within the context of the events on the day, several live bullets were fired by the SWAT team, some causing injuries to members of the public. In fact, the Commission contradicts or finds as unreliable the claims of just how many shots that were made, as you heard the minister in that clip played to you a while ago. Further to this, the Commission finds that the warning shots fired were so done in reckless disregard for the safety of persons in the vicinity of this highly built-up area. The Commission further finds that the ammunition used were live bullets, and this further heightens the belief of the Commission that the shots were calculated to cause death and not to control the crowd. However, the Commission finds that there was no firing of guns at the polling station itself. The commission finds that the use of masked men in electoral security policing represents a deviation from standard practice in Ghana. I read just one last one. The commission also finds there was a lack of protocols surrounding the giving out of and accountability for weapons and ammunition, as well as general asset inventory taking upon the completion of mission within the establishment of the national security. All right. So the government, in compliance with the Constitution, was to either issue a white paper and publishing the report, or if it was not interested in publishing the report, to issue a statement in the national media and to explain why it was not going to publish the report. This white paper is what is now bringing all the controversy. So let's start with you. As the commission says, it is the chief of staff that gave them all the facilities, the support, everything it needed to do its work and execute in an excellent manner. So they had commendations for the chief of staff. That's where you are coming from. Why is government accepting and rejecting portions of the report?
Well, thank you very much, Samson. Let me say good morning to your cherished listeners and viewers. And to begin very quickly by reiterating government's commendation of the commission and its members for the work they did. The members of the commission chaired by Mr. Emil Short, Professor Richard Mensah Bonsu, who was my criminal law lecturer, Mr. P.K. Achampong, a former Inspector General of Police. These are eminent citizens of our country, well respected, astute in their own right, and government continues to thank them for their work. Secondly, Samson, it's also important to place it in context that reports of commissions of inquiry, findings and recommendations of commissions of inquiries are subject to scrutiny by the government. I think in the wisdom of the framers of our constitution, when a commission of inquiry is set up, which is essentially a fact-finding inquiry, when their findings and recommendations are made, the government is vested with the authority or mandate to review the report, particularly the findings and recommendations, accept those it finds appropriate, and reject those it finds inappropriate or unable to accept for stated reasons. And Samson,
and I want you guys to take note. He says the government is mandated to review. So take note of that when we shall ask that question. Sure. Please proceed.
The government has the mandate, the constitutional mandate, to review the findings and recommendations of the report. And I will add very quickly that in doing so, you have had the benefit of the report. We have had the government has had the benefit of the report. The entire evidence adduced before the commission, the exhibits which were tendered before the commission, and the totality of the materials which the commission had. The government has had the benefit of that. And so the government, if you want, sits in a chair of having all the materials which the commission relied upon to come to its conclusions, to review the findings of the commission and make its mind as to accepting or rejecting the findings and recommendations of the commission.
So help us to understand. The government's, and I quote, the fundamental response of government to the findings of the report is that the report failed to address the first and most critical of the terms of reference of the commission, which was, quote, to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry into the circumstances of and establish the facts leading to the events and associated violence that occurred during the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-elections on the 31st day of January 2019, unquote. The failure to do so disables government from accepting in whole the findings of the commission. Some of the findings are accepted by government, whereas others are rejected. reasons for government's position have been assigned in the white paper. So this is damning, that government's response fundamentally, very damning, fundamentally is that they did no job, because the most important and critical term, this government's words, most important and critical term is to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry. They say the report failed to address that.
Well,
justify that.
Those are your words, but even
they are not my words. They are the government's words.
I hear, but those are your inference and deductions from that position of government, that government has damned the work of the commission, that they did no work. No, government has accepted some of the recommendations and findings. Government has rejected some. The first and most important term of reference of the commission, which was to establish the facts leading to the events of 31st January 2019, in the view of government, that has not been dealt with.
If they failed, then they failed.
They failed to deal with that term.
If they could not deal with that term,
but that is
then they did no job.
Those are your words. Now, I will be coming to the reason why government took that position. But very quickly, I was just establishing the point that reports of Commission of Inquiries, findings and recommendations have been rejected in the past. And I give you an example of the Justice Jamafi Commission of Inquiries report, where very far-reaching fundamental recommendations were made, such as, for instance, that the minister should refund some amount of money, and white paper which was issued by the then government categorically. I'll be very happy. I see that Joy FM is done. If we're a listing of those recommendations which were accepted and rejected and given a percentage, you probably should go and take the Jamafi report, check how many recommendations were rejected, how many were accepted, take the Wako Commission report, check how many recommendations were accepted, how many were rejected, and you'll be surprised. I mean, colossal sums of money were asked to be refunded to the state. The government categorically, I'll give you an example, government does not accept, at page 15 of the white paper on the Jamafi report, government does not accept the
report, as you may know, was about that embarrassing outing we did for the Brazil. Yes.
Where there was a categorical recommendation, in that case also by eminent citizens, in my view, Justice Jamafi himself and as chief judge, Mr. Fuamani, a lawyer of good standing and all of that. And government said, government does not accept the recommendation that the former Minister for Youth and Sports, Honorable Evese Free Ankara, refund the amount of 15,000 Ghana cedis reported as spent, goes on, an amount of 577,500 United States dollars was asked to be refunded to the public exchequer by the then president of the GFA. Government rejected. And I have done the work you did. If you go through, you will see that a substantial portion of it.
At the time, we went through this same sort of arguments. And I'm sure if we did a playback, we'll hear what you had to say about what government did on its own commission. Now, we have to deal with your commission.
Let's deal with that.
Tell us why.
Let's deal with
you have
that.
done what you have done.
Now, Samson, let me also make the point. And you know better. Commissions of inquiries, their historical and conceptual underpinnings are fact-finding. I mean, the government or the state, an event occurs, and the government wants to unravel the facts behind it and says, go into it for us. And the Commission of Inquiry goes into it. Ghana 50 Commission of Inquiry is another example when PNN and Rekubebe and Co were arraigned before court, and the court said, you cannot use the report of a Commission of Inquiry as a basis for prosecution because essentially it's a fact-finding mission and so on and so forth. But it's also important for us to recognize that in the wisdom of the framers of our Constitution, the framers of the Constitution itself had also said, one, that when the recommendations are made, and it is stated clearly, I think in Article 281C, that the Commission has to furnish reasons leading to the conclusion stated in the report. That's one. Two, that the government may choose to publish the report with the associated white paper. Three, that the government may choose not to, and if it doesn't, it has to give reasons for. And the white paper clothes the government with authority, and indeed the legal authority supporting that proposition are bound, that the government is clothed with authority to accept or reject the recommendations.
That's not in the Constitution.
Not in the Constitution, but it's clearly established by case law that the government has authority to accept or reject, and the legal implications thereof. Now, what we can interrogate here is the reasons given for the rejection.
Exactly, that's the question I
asked. Yeah, and I'm saying to you, for instance, on the first term of reference of the commission, which the government takes the position that it was not dealt with. Samson, when you take a look at the white paper, and I hope that all of us have taken pains to critically examine
we have it, and let's be referencing it as much as we can.
Examine the reports and the white paper. You will see that government took pains to examine and review the entire evidence before the commission and went as far as lifting portions of the evidence which were on record, which had been presented to the government, to make its case on each of the recommendations rejected or accepted. Even in some cases, recommendations that had been accepted in part, government is taking pains to deal with them. Now, let me give you an example. The commission at paragraph 1.6 on page 42 of the report stated as follows, and I quote, "The commission further finds that the SWAT team, which was deployed to the electoral grounds of the Labaoleshi School polling station grounds in complete disregard of the officially laid down electoral security arrangements, were officers of the national security establishment," end quote. You go to paragraph 1.8, and the same commission finds, and I quote, "The commission further finds that these men were deployed to follow up on intelligence to the effect that certain arms and ammunition stored in the warehouse within the constituency and to intercept and retrieve same." So by the second quote that I've just read out, which is paragraph 1.8, you will agree with me that the commission finds that the deployment was to follow up, or to follow up in their own ways, on intelligence to the effect that certain arms and ammunition stored in the warehouse within the constituency and to intercept and retrieve same. Now, when you go further, you will see also in the evidence adduced before the commission, that the commission came to the conclusion that a vigilante group associated with the National Democratic Congress, the Hawks, had been bussed to the vicinity. It is clear, I'm not making it up. It's right here.
I don't remember reading bussed, but because of the presence of one gentleman who
I'm not quoting.
Who they say his presence clearly showed that the Hawks would have been present.
I'm not quoting. Yeah. I'm not quoting. That's why I use the word bars.
Okay.
But I'm saying that the commission, the evidence adduced before the commission, thoroughly analyzed by the commission and accepted by the commission, was to the conclusion that, and in their words, let me just stay off paraphrasing. In their own words, I quote, "The commission finds that by his presence at that location, at the time when elections were taking place, a strong suspicion of the presence of the Hawks was raised."
Great.
There you go. In fact, the commission itself poses a question. Were the Hawks present that day? And it goes on to answer that question.
Yes, they do. Answer it.
Every one of the injured persons admitted having heard of the group, the Hawks. Though one claimed not to know, I think they wanted to, one claimed not to know anything more than that. In this regard, the presence of Theophilus Sedodi, a man of unusually great physique and impossible to miss, even in a crowd, was of some significance. This person, who is described on the internet as the leader of the Hawks, a militia group associated with the National Democratic Congress, was formally inaugurated at the Unity Walk of the National Democratic Congress in Kumasi. And interestingly, President Mahama led that Unity Walk. Continue. Sedodi denied before the commission that he was a member of the militia group, the Hawks. He admitted being the person photographed on the day the Hawks group was reported to have been inaugurated in Kumasi, wearing a black T-shirt embossed with the head of a hawk on the top left-hand side. His explanation of how he came to be wearing that T-shirt that day was unconvincing. And he goes on and on. On 31st January, his presence at the frontage of the parliamentary candidate's residence, and don't forget, I've just referred you to a finding of fact by the commission who says that the SWAT team had been deployed to follow up on intelligence that ammunition had been stockpiled in a location in that constituency.
Right.
And the commission proceeds. The Hawks, he was positively identified by Akomia of the SWAT team.
And Akumia is double, the guy you heard a lot about.
Yes, double. So, I'm establishing the nexus. I'm establishing the nexus.
The mobile phone seller term security
has been present in the restive crowd at the frontage of the parliamentary candidate's house that morning, leading to his subsequent chase and arrest by the SWAT team. And then the commission concludes. The commission finds that by his presence at the location at a time when elections were taking place, a strong suspicion of the presence of the hawks was raised.
Right.
Now, if you read the executive summary or even read just the report, you will not find this. If you read the executive summary as in the findings, you will not find this portion that I've read out. You have to go and read the analysis of the evidence to find this.
You are reading this under what heading of the report?
This must be under the analysis of the evidence. If you go to the report, the analysis of the evidence, this evidence.
No, I'm inviting you to go and pick where it is coming from, so that we all know that that's what you're saying.
No problem. No, don't worry. That's at paragraphs 1.2 to 1.22 on pages 34 and 35 of the report.
Right, and it comes under what heading?
Let me check it for you, please.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Okay, this. Okay.
This is the report.
Okay.
Page 34.
Right. Okay, so.
So if I may conclude, so essentially in answering Samson, I'm seeking.
Sorry.
No.
Yes.
Assessment of evidence.
Yeah, assessment of evidence.
No, wait.
Yes, correct.
Great.
So this was evidence adduced, accepted, and assessed by the commission.
Great.
And in the assessment of the evidence, the commission comes to some conclusions. So this is the point we have made, which is that the facts which led to the events of 31st January 2019 was, in our view, in the view of the government, one, that the national security apparatus had picked intelligence, that ammunition had been stockpiled.
Intelligence with the commission comes to a conclusion was at best of unreliable quality.
Which the government has commented on.
Okay.
Which we have commented on.
All right.
And which we have, which is, I'm answering
Proceed
the question.
with the point.
Yeah, I'm answering the question you asked about why we took the view that the first and most critical term of reference of the commission was not resolved, if you want. Which is the point I'm making. And if you want, I probably should begin with our position as to.
So your problem is that this is an assessment they made. You are happy with the assessment. However, the assessment should have found itself on some pages of the report, and it was not there.
No, more than that. That when you take the evidence before the commission, and I don't want to be boxed into a position of, if you want, something that smacks of running down the commission or attacking the work of the commission, or coming to the conclusion that government entirely is against the work of the commission in totality. Because they are very far-reaching and fundamental findings and recommendations of the commission which were accepted by the government.
Nobody can say government is entirely against it.
Because the report you have pinned me down on one particular issue.
Right.
And which is what I'm trying to establish. And that point is that when you take the evidence before the commission, you take the evidence accepted by the commission, some of the findings of the commission itself, and you take the totality of all of that, the conclusion is that the facts which led to the events of 31st January 2019 were that, one, there were stockpile of ammunition and arms in a location of Ayawa's West Wagon, where by-elections were being held.
That was established?
No, that was established.
No,
not established that they were, that they followed up on intelligence. Not established that they, in fact,
is the intelligence of unreliable quality.
Which is what we are quarreling with. And if you allow me to
no
finish.
arms were found or retrieved.
No problem. Nobody says so.
Okay.
No one has said so. But I'm saying that there was that intelligence.
Great.
That if you take the evidence adduced before the commission about the hawks, if you take other pieces of evidence, if you put all of that together, the facts which led to the events of 31st were that intelligence had been picked, that intelligence was actionable, and which resulted in the deployment of legitimate official national security operatives, contrary to what the national chairman of the NDC had told all of us. And I see that, you should pay attention to that too. I mean, that is also very fundamental, that the chairman of a party says that people of unknown armed vigilantes wearing national security uniform brought from invincible forces had been deployed into a constituency, that 10 of them per polling station, 100 polling stations means 1,000 of them, the commission finds that indeed there were no disturbances in any of the polling stations. Right. They said it was close to the polling, but not in the polling. So essentially, the national chairman was not accurate. Sam George, member of parliament for Ningo Pram Pram, had said categorically that someone had been shot and killed in his own house. The commission is turned out not to be accurate. And that deployment that deployment, to follow up on that actionable intelligence, is what led to the events of 31st January 2019. Actionable intelligence, intelligence which required action by national security operatives. So that is the
if you can get to the bottom of this for me, because as I read, my question to you is it your case that this assessment is not part of the Commission's report, or that even though it is part of the Commission's report, it ought to have been given a certain significance that it was not giving? That's why you are fighting the Commission on this.
The latter is correct. The weight placed on this evidence, little weight was placed on this evidence.
Okay.
And that if the proper, appropriate weight was placed on this evidence, the Commission would have found clearly that the intelligence which the national security outfit acted upon was credible intelligence, was intelligence of quality, was actionable intelligence, which indeed is the bedrock or the foundation precipitating the events of 31st January 2019.
All right. Now that's clearly understood. Please proceed to your next other ground of disagreements.
Well, not necessarily disagreements. I mean, so that is one of the areas
disagreements
that
are fair.
No, I hear you.
And disagreement is used rather, what you use here is reject, not disagreement. You reject.
Yeah, exactly. Which is actually the language that white papers normally adopt. Now, and I've been making the point, Samson, that we have to look at the Commission's report in its totality, situate it in the context of the events of 31st January 2019. And I've been making the point about some of the statements which were categorically made, or allegations or claims which were made by leading members of the opposition. I see that my friend, Honorable Sam George, is so livid and he's been writing all sort of statements and quoting the Bible to the president and the rest. But again, something, he should be consulting you, because you will find also in the report that very damning adverse findings have been made against him. Member of Parliament, an honorable member of Parliament, whom the Commission found very clearly that he had asserted.
And let's not use that adverse finding has been made against somebody lightly. Let's point to where exactly it is, because this is the consequence of adverse findings by a report. When there is an adverse finding made against you by a commission of inquiry, upon the expiration of 6 months, preceding after the white paper or publication has been done, that report becomes a judgment of the High Court, and you can only appeal to the Court of Appeal. If you don't take steps to reverse it, or you are unable to reverse it, you cannot be an MP, you cannot contest to become a president. It is very damning. So when you point to, you say adverse finding, please take us there. Don't say it.
That's why I say you should consult you. Because
the appeal is as of right.
Yes, as of right.
Within 3 months.
Within 3 months.
But that's why I say you should consult you, because I'm not too sure.
Okay. All right. So you know what? Do this for me. Do this for me. Just hold on.
Yeah.
Go over what you're about to present. Hold on. Wait.
Okay.
Go over what you're about to present, and when I return, we'll hear you. I want to go to the phone lines and speak to John in Debugre. He's a lawyer and former MP. He's played many roles as a citizen, and now obviously a senior citizen. Thank you very much for joining us, John in Debugre. Okay, we lost him. Okay, so he's been making some very, very interesting comments. You know, there was a recommendation for the reprimand of the minister, Brian Echampong, on the basis that that's a minister of state who is at the national security, that because he had ultimate responsibility, he should get a reprimand. The government rejects that completely. Thank you very much for joining us, John in Debugre. Oh, we lost him again. We will get him. When we do, we'll let him justify why he says he should be prosecuted instead of just being reprimanded. Yes, go to your next point.
So something I've just been saying that perhaps Honorable Sam George should be consulting you, because
should be consulting a lawyer.
Yeah, a lawyer. I have no position as to whether or not this is adverse. I mean, but it's a serious matter that he needs to interrogate, because if you look at paragraph 2.15 on page 40 of the report, the commission makes this finding, and this was a finding in response to an assertion he made.
And he made
passionately in the words of the commission, which the commission makes a definite finding of fact on it. And I quote, he said, "We find as a fact that this unit was set up between 2010 and 2012. It is thus and true that this unit was set up under the current MPP administration that took office in January 2017. Although Honorable Sam George asserted with conviction, if I even use words than passion actually, conviction, that the unit did not exist at the time he served in government at the office of the president, he was clearly mistaken, because it did. Perhaps it may be their special uniforms that are new, but certainly not their existence. Quote. Now, I take note of the usage of the word mistaken. That is where the issue is. I mean, if the commission had, for instance, said he told a lie, or that it's, or even if it's untrue, it still becomes contentious. But the point I'm making is that he testified on oath, number one. Number two, he made that categorical assertion on conviction that this SWAT team never existed under the previous administration. It was set up suddenly to unleash violence on the Ghanaian people. And never forget something. You have to situate it in the context of the claims and the allegations, which is indeed, amongst others, what caused public and national outrage in our country. What is happening? That we are told that a certain unknown armed men, vigilante groups from the Invincible Forces have been unleashed onto Ghanaians. Akufo-Addo and his government is set up a certain militia group and so on.
In the light of this statement and the conclusions, the finding as made by the commission, that this assertion he made with conviction is untrue, and that at best he was mistaken, you want to say that they ought to have elevated this because they have come to the point that he spoke on truth. And speaking on truth on oath means you are committing the crime of perjury.
That's right. That's right.
And so they should have elevated that. They didn't do that. For saying mistaken, you disagree. That's the point.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not even, I'm not disagreeing, or I don't have much difficulty. I'm just raising the legal implications as you
are raising because you have an issue. What is your issue?
My issue is that this finding of fact against Sam George potentially constitutes an adverse finding by a commission of inquiry.
And the commission should have stated so.
It would have been, it would have been more welcoming if the commission had expressly stated so in their finding. But it still doesn't take away the fact that they found so.
All right. Okay, so let's go to Mr. John Ndebugri. Thank you. Let's speak to John Ndebugri and come back. And when we do, I'll let you also share with us what you think that if it had been a minister in charge of security who was in charge of security during Mohammed's period, who had been questioned, then they could be saying he's lying. But for someone who was not a minister or was not in the security arrangement, is it okay to say he was mistaken, even though he stated with conviction? Okay. All right. Thank you for joining us, Mr. John Ndebugri.
Good morning, Samson.
Thank you very much for making time for us, sir. Now, first, let's go to what one of the points that you raised, and then you can share with us also your general view of what should be done in the implementation of the report. You say the recommendation for a reprimand for Brian Echampong for ultimate responsibility is not good enough. There should rather be a consideration for prosecution. How is that possible?
Well, yeah, I'm happy that, good morning to you and then your panelists there, particularly Honorable James Agalga, my junior in the past. You see, you put it right when you said that I should possibly comment on what I have said already and some other things. I want to suggest to you that we should structure the discussion in this manner, taking note of the following. You see, the commission, I'll come and answer the question about Mr. Bright Achampo.
Brian Achampo.
The Commission deliberately structured its report in 5 areas, thematic areas: structural, operational,
right,
individual liabilities,
right,
compensations, and general.
That's right.
As far as I'm concerned, what really captures my concern, because your program is limited, what really captures my concern is the structural. The recommendations contained in the structural recommendations and the white paper's response there.
Okay.
And maybe to some extent, the individual liabilities. We can discuss the operational aspects at another time.
Okay.
Yes. So it is unfortunate that the government of the Republic treated the structural recommendations in your terms, pick something. But
cherry picking.
With some swift dismissal. And I don't want to incite my learned members of the commission against the government. But the beginning of the preamble to the white paper condemns the members of the commission that they were not fair, they were not impartial, they were not truthful. And I am amazed as to how these eminent gentlemen and ladies could be so untruthful, so unfair, so impartial. Because I know all of them.
So sorry, did they say they were untruthful, unfaithful, or they said they did not? That they did not. No, if I may be heard, he said they failed to do a faithful and impartial. Is it the same as you are unfaithful, you are untruthful?
You are a lawyer. They fail to do. We normally address our letters with you fail or neglect or refuse. And if you are, as a lawyer, if you write a letter to me that I have failed to do A, B, C, it means that I have not done A, B, C. So they were to do on fair, truthful, the other
impartial.
Impartial.
That doesn't mean
investigation. Then the report says you failed to do this. What is the meaning of that? That we don't need to argue on that. It's a matter of interpretation. My interpretation is that the government is telling the commission that they did not do those things. They were not impartial. They were not truthful, or they did not do the investigation truthfully, impartially, and the other one
faithfully.
Yes, and I am saying that is already a problem, because what is the reason for these eminent persons to do things impartially, or partially, untruthfully, and unfairly? That is a matter beside the point.
Okay.
But let me come back to the report. I'm saying that let us emphasize on the structure. The report on the structure.
Yeah, recommendation on structural problems.
You see, people keep on saying national security. I've said it many times, but well, they don't pay attention. There's nothing like national security. The Constitution mandates the establishment of a National Security Council, and its functions are clearly, set out in Article 83 or so of the Constitution. The functions are clear. Yeah. So when people say national security, I don't get it. There's a National Security Council, and Article 85 of the Constitution forbids the establishment of any security organization outside the organizations established by the Constitution. So when you go and establish when you go and establish a national security minister, what is the meaning of that? It is in direct contravention of Article 85.
Interesting.
And you go and establish a national security minister of state or a minister of state at the presidency in charge of national security. It is still worse. And you go and establish a police station with an armory in the National Security Secretariat. The Constitution only recognizes a National Security Council Secretariat. It doesn't recognize a National Security Police Station. And you go and establish a National Security Police Station, and you call yourself National Security, and you go and recruit hoodlums, and you train them and build them into muscles.
But the commission didn't find that.
Lead them on people. That is in direct contravention of Article 285 of the Constitution. So structurally, what the commission, in my view, my humble view,
will you be allowed to comment?
Sammy, in my very humble view, what the commission members were trying to do was to draw the attention of His Excellency the President to the fact that they've departed from Article 85. So go back and restructure. And they said somewhere about the National Security Coordinator. He's the only one recognized in the Constitution.
Yes, they say he should be the one in charge and be reported to by all subordinate national security operatives.
He is the only person to be there. The question of National Security Minister, Minister of State and National Security is job for the boys. They are redundant. They are a pestilence. They must be removed. They are a pestilence.
The creation of ministries, is at the discretion of the president.
Yes. But
so what's illegal about it?
You cannot exercise your discretion against provisions of the Constitution. The Constitution says don't establish a national security organization not recognized by the Constitution. Where is it in the Constitution that you should appoint a national security minister? So, Samson, let me just finish with you quickly so that...
A national security minister is not an illegal armed force, which the Constitution is against.
Pardon me, sir?
A national security minister or ministry is not what the Constitution contemplates and prohibits. It prohibits forming or establishing an armed force which is which is not mandated by Parliament.
Have you read Article 85?
Let me read it.
Yes, please. Dr. Drosa wants to read it for your hearing again.
Yes,
I will listen.
Yes,
okay.
in Double Grey, Article 85 of the Constitution, which is under the heading Establishment of Security Services.
Yes.
No agency, establishment, or other organization concerned with national security shall be established except as provided for under this Constitution.
So a ministry is not an organization or an agency or whatever. What are you talking about? This is a question of interpretation.
Okay.
I am saying that I interpret that thing to mean that the only person who is qualified to be there is the National Security Coordinator.
Okay.
But you're not mentioning the Constitution. The National Security Coordinator is
It's
not
an organization. Is it established in the Constitution?
It's not mentioned.
Okay. So to the issue you mentioned earlier.
So what's he talking about?
Am I allowed to continue?
To the issue you mentioned earlier. Sorry, don't be interjecting. Wait. The issue you mentioned earlier, the recommendation was that the commission recommends that Mr. Brian Champong be reprimanded for his ultimate responsibility as minister in authorizing an operation of that character on a day of an election in a built-up area. You say that they are treating him with kid gloves.
No, that came under. I am now discussing the white paper.
That's right.
The report and the white paper.
The white paper rejects this.
About what I had said earlier when I had not seen the report and the white paper.
Okay.
And I'm saying that in my humble view, we should look at the recommendations in 5 areas,
right.
structural, operational, individual liability.
Right.
You have jumped to individual liability. I'm talking about structural, which is the most important thing for us. I am saying that the recommendation that the SWAT team, whatever operational group is in that so-called national security, whatever, should be disbanded, must be enforced.
Okay.
Otherwise, my brother, and NDC people sitting there, you've lost the elections already.
Oh.
Because these goons have been trained to go there and disrupt the election so that somebody will win. And the commission says, disband. And you say, no, you won't. I have heard this, your panelists talking plenty there. I think that he wasn't making a point. We're talking about a commission of inquiry established in 2019, not a commission of inquiry established about football, flying of money across the sea to some place in some 2007 or so. So it shouldn't waste our time.
Okay.
Now, let me finish. Finally, you see, I have a problem also with the commission in the sense that Article 280, Clause 2, states as follows. With your permission, I'll read. Where a commission of inquiry makes an adverse finding against any person, the report of the commission of inquiry shall, for the purposes of this Constitution, be deemed to be a judgment of the High Court. And accordingly, an appeal shall lie as of right from the finding of the Commission of Inquiry to the Court of Appeal. So, I mean, these eminent commission members were aware of this provision, and they are aware of Brobe and
Republic and Brobe and Mpieni
case. And so to recommend that people should be prosecuted, I am amiss about that. And I had said at the beginning of the commission, if you go back and Google, you will see that I said that the establishment of the commission was either pointless or it was calculated to prevent the prosecution of criminal elements.
Okay.
And that is what has happened. The commission says that they should recommend that they should be prosecuted. You cannot. All they can do is that they should refer them to the High Court for sentencing.
Okay.
Because the commission cannot sentence. The commission will find you culpable and pronounce, and then you have to go to the High Court to be sentenced. So
how is that done? How is that done? How is that possible when there's already, if an adverse finding is made, an appeal is available? How do they go to the High Court for sentencing?
If you don't appeal within the stipulated time, or even before you appeal before the state, you should refer to the High Court for sentencing.
We'll explore that. Thank you very much for your interesting views. We'll explore that too. Thank you very much. John Indebugri is a lawyer, former MP, and he's been many other things, right? Yes. Okay. So, so I'm checking, and we are on the top of the hour now, right?
If I can make a quick comment.
Yes, quickly.
Well, Samson, first of all, the matters he spoke to about the members of the commission and the position of the government as to the first term of reference, I think that one is just mischievous propaganda. I think you quite rightly was trying to put him right, but he will not listen to you.
You mean a former member of parliament on the ticket of the NPP is doing propaganda against you?
Clearly, that's the submission he made. That was clear propaganda. He was just politicking. He's just trying to incite people and so on and so forth. When Prime Minister Gordon Brown appointed Sir John Chilcot to inquire into the Iraqi war and the circumstances of the Iraqi war, and he presented his report, the parts of the reports which were rejected or jettisoned by the government of the time did not by any means reduce the standing of the members of the commission.
Okay.
So the fact that the government rejects parts of a commission's report doesn't mean that the members of the commission have been damned or condemned or any of that. Now, number two, it's obvious that Mr. Ndebugri hasn't read the report in full, because if he had read the report in full, he will not be this misled into coming to the conclusion that the government of Akufo-Addo has set up hoodlums and a SWAT team and so on and so forth, and that is going to result in the defeat of the NDC. He should read paragraph 2.15 on page 40, which I've just read here, where the commission found categorically that the SWAT team was established in 2010 and not under Akufo-Addo's government. So he's clearly not read the report, because if he reads the report, he cannot but come to the conclusion that this SWAT team was established at the time when my good friend was in government. At the time when President Mills was the president of our country, the SWAT team was not established under
Maybe
Akufo-Addo.
an alternative, conclusion is also reachable by him when he reads, where they clearly suggest that unless these guys were sent there to, as it were, scare people and so on. So it's about the use at this time. So the real question is not about when they were established, because that one, we know that while Sam George was speaking there and said they were recently established, we all knew that
they were even paraded at an Independence Day celebration.
Right.
And I'm saying to you that Mr. Ndebugri has stated on your show categorically that this SWAT team, hoodlums, he uses the word hoodlums, were put together as a SWAT team by Akufo-Addo's government. And I'm pointing to him that if he goes to page 40 and he reads carefully...
He made that categorical statement?
Oh, he did. He said so. He said, and that if the SWAT team is not disbanded, then NDC will lose it. But finally, I find it also very...
If you look at page 55 of the report, what the Honorable Ndebugri said in relation to hoodlums and their integration into the security apparatus finds expression in page 55 of the report.
And
they call them hooligans.
Yes,
it's captured. Oh, that's fine. But the report clearly says that the SWAT team was established since 2010. The report also says that successive government...
So let's not belabor that. Thank you. Let's not belabor that.
The Minister for National Security, I'm very surprised. The fact that there's a police council, the fact that there's a Ghana Police Service, the president cannot appoint a Minister for Interior. What sort of logic is this? The fact that
Minister for Interior.
No, I'm saying, I'm establishing the logic of his argument that there's a Ghana Police Council established by the Constitution, there is a Ghana Police Service, just as there's a National Security Council and the National Security Secretariat. The president cannot, pursuant to the executive powers reposed in him, appoint a minister to be responsible for the functions vested in him as president for national security.
So the minister is appointed to oversee a secretariat.
Is appointed to oversee the functions of the president in relation to national security as established by the Constitution.
And what has the Constitution established?
The Constitution established...
A council with a secretariat.
Yeah, that's fine. All. But the function, the role that the president has to play in this National Security Council, National Security Secretariat, as established by the Constitution, that role, the president has the right to delegate it to a minister.
The Constitution clearly, and the Intelligence Act, says appoint a coordinator.
Yeah, but there's a coordinator. But ministers exercise delegated powers. The minister is like the minister essentially.
And for the first time in our history, you have two ministers in that regard.
We can interrogate that.
Okay.
No problem.
All right. Let's take a break. Let's take a break, and
I find nothing wrong with that.
When we return, I guess I've seen them writing and annotating the reports and the white papers. We'll hear their views. We'll be right back.